The dawn crept softly over the flat Kansas plains, spilling pale light across the endless stretches of rippling wheat and dusty earth. A chill hung in the early air, just enough to remind the land was still waiting to warm with the sun's full rise. Merrill sat at the weathered kitchen table, the surface scarred by years of steady use, rubbed smooth in places by calloused hands like his own. The creak of the wooden chair beneath him matched the slow sigh that seemed to settle in the quiet house, a sigh he'd been carrying for far too long now. His two children, small and bright-eyed, despite the hard stretches of life, ate their breakfast with quiet diligence, as if their hunger was only half there, dulled by the lingering absence. Outside, a faint breeze whispered through the cracked window panes, ruffling the edges of a faded checkered tablecloth. Amber light from the low sun caught the soft dust motes swirling in the air, giving the kitchen a fragile translucence. Merrill's gaze dropped to the plate before him, scraps of dry cornbread and thickened milk left after the children's meal, and the worn tin cup of black coffee, bitter and cooling too quickly. His eyes traced the faint scar above his right eyebrow, a remnant from a long-ago injury on these unforgiving plains. Weathered hands clasped the cup, grinding the rough edges of his knuckles. He was tired, bone-deep tired, kind of weariness that no sleep could chase away. 2 children, a farm to tend, a house hollowed out by loss. Good things, he thought bitterly, no longer came his way. His son, a sharp-eyed boy of 7, named Eli, looked up and offered a tentative smile. "Pa, the wheat's looking real good this year. Maybe we'll have a lot to bring in come harvest." Merrill managed a faint nod, but the words fell flat inside him. "We've luck enough if it don't rain too hard," he said quietly. His voice was rough, cracked from disuse in recent years. "But don't expect too much." His daughter, little Annie, clutched the hem of her faded dress, gazing outside at the same wild gold-hued prairie. "I want to go to the harvest social. Mama used to take us," she said softly. The mention of her mother, gone these 2 years now, pulled at his chest, a sharp pain no amount of stoicism could dull. Before he could answer, a soft knock sounded at the door, followed by gentle footsteps on the dry earth outside. Merrill's eyes flicked to the window, catching sight of a figure approaching, his neighbor, Ivy. She carried a basket, worn but carefully mended, filled with freshly picked garden greens and a few wild herbs. Her chestnut hair was loosely braided over one shoulder, strands escaping to frame a face both strong and easy, marked by a small birthmark on her left cheek. Her soft green eyes met his with a quiet, steady kindness. She said little, nodding in greeting. When Merrill offered a gruff nod back, she smiled gently and held out the basket, as if offering truce to the coldness he'd unwittingly wrapped around himself. "Found a few things from the garden," she said, her voice steady but low, not insistent, just present. Merrill looked away first, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of her quiet presence. He wasn't used to kindness, especially the delicate kind that didn't demand anything in return. His grief had turned him inward, made him a man few dared visit. His lips pressed into a thin line as he took the basket, fingers curling slowly around the handles. "Thanks," he muttered. The word felt strange, almost foreign on his tongue. Ivy didn't push, didn't say more. She turned to tend her own small farmstead a few fields over, but the soft smile lingered in the morning light like a promise whispered only between them. Something unspoken had passed between them in that simple exchange. A seed planted quietly, slow and steady, as the grass growing beneath their boots. ****. The harvest social in the small town of Plainsboro thrummed with life as the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and pink. Wood smoke mingled with the laughter of children and the chatter of neighbors caught up in the fleeting comfort of community. Long tables groaned beneath pies, platters of roasted meat, freshly baked bread, and sweet preserves. Folks swirled around in worn boots and patched dresses, the music of fiddles and dulcimers weaving through the warm evening air. Merrill stood at the edge of the gathering, leaning against a weathered post near the dance floor, his lean figure silhouetted by the glow of lanterns hung from tree branches. His deep hazel eyes, shadowed and reflective, followed his children as they darted through clusters of friends and cousins, their laughter spilling out like sparks. Eli's laughter, sharp and full of hope, made Merrill's chest ache. Annie's delighted shrieks tugged at something fragile inside him. Even amid the happy noise, Merrill felt the familiar distance settle between himself and the crowd. Hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn coat, his scarred brow drawn tight in thought. Good things, he thought again. Good things don't last. They slip away, like the dusk taking the sun, leaving only shadows. His heart remained guarded, the years of loss weighing heavily like chains he wore without complaint. And yet there was Ivy, moving quietly through the throng, her presence almost overlooked by all but him, Maud. She stepped beside him as if summoned by the silence between his thoughts, her basket now empty but her hands full of a bouquet. Wild flowers plucked fresh from the fields, delicate bluebells and bright yellow sunflowers, their petals brushing against one another like soft whispers. Her smile was gentle, holding no expectations. "Merrill," she said softly, voice light, "I thought you might like these." He blinked, startled for a moment by this simple gesture. His fingers twitched almost unconsciously, brushing against the folds of his coat where he intended to deflect her kindness. The thought was sharp and quick to turn her away, to deny the quiet offering. That was easier, definitely easier. But something in the way her eyes didn't ask, in the way her kindness hung like a fragile web, caught him off guard. He glanced down at the bouquet, the wildflowers, a splash of hope against the somber tones of his coat, and for a breath he hesitated. A corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, hesitant and fragile. Then he took the bouquet in one slow, careful movement. "Thank you." His voice was low, but firm, with a weight newly lifted, or at least lightened. The small kindness kindled a gentle warmth within, like embers beneath cold ashes. Seedling poking through the underrun earth. Ivy's glance softened. "You're not as alone as you think, Merrill." He said nothing in return, but the words echoed deep in the folds of the evening's fading light, settling into his bones. The harvest social spun around them, laughter drifting like music. But for the first time in long months, Merrill allowed himself a moment's quiet hope, nestled in the fading flowers. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk, Otteris. Mornings came colder. Frost bit the edges of leaves, and the distant hills caught the hint of winter's approach. Merrill's life was still measured in the steady rhythms of work and care, punctuated by the anxious, protective watch over his children, yet something new had begun to stir in the ready quiet between days. One morning he stepped outside to find a neatly stacked pile of chopped wood by the porch. The logs were split cleanly, their rough bark dusted with pine needles. The scent of fresh-cut timber lingered in the chilly air, a silent offering. Merrill's hands itched with gratitude and confusion. Who could have done this? No note, no claim, just the steady, unspoken care of a neighbor. Later, leaning wearily against the doorframe, he spotted Ivy disappearing down the path toward her own homestead, a soft wave, her only goodbye. The small birthmark on her cheek caught the sun, shining like a quiet beacon. He studied the stacked wood with slow appreciation. The gesture unsettled his carefully maintained solitude, yet beneath that discomfort, a spark of warmth took root. Days passed and more small gifts appeared. A jar of preserves left on the windowsill, the rich smell of peaches and cinnamon drifting into the cool air. A hand-knit scarf thoughtfully draped over the porch railing, its woolen threads soft and sturdy. warmth in wolf form. Each act was silent, gentle, no demands, no fanfare, only presence. Merrill's weathered fingers brushed the scarf one evening, his deep hazel eyes tracing the woven patterns as if reading a secret message. He could not deny the stirring inside him, the uneasy but persistent feeling of unguarded space opening. Each gift was a quiet thread, woven into the fabric of his days, a soft rebellion against the fortress of grief and resignation he'd built around his heart. At night, as he sat by the hearth with Eli and Annie, nestled close, their small hands gripping his, Merrill's thoughts drifted again to Ivy. Her simple kindnesses, her patient quiet, had begun to puncture the gloom of his world. Good things do last, he thought quietly. Maybe just not the way he'd expected. The scar on his brow itched faintly, an old wound, but one healing in its own way. The field outside his window glowed under the watchful moon, promising slow growth and the hope of renewal. And in that promise, Merrill found, for the first time in many winters, a reason to believe that the heart could mend, softly, one gentle gesture at a time. The evening air was cool, the fading light folding into shadow without hurry. Inside Ivy's small, sturdy cabin, a fire danced low in the hearth, casting flickering amber glow on the rough-hewn walls. The scent of burning pine wove with the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging above the cooking stove. A faint, gentle hum of crickets reached through the open window, blending with a rustle of leafy branches bending in a gentle breeze. Outside, the dusk deepened, the first stars pricking the sky. Merrill lingered near the edge of the yard, hands tucked in the pockets of his worn coat, the lean silhouette of the children standing against the fading light beside Ivy. Annie clutched her brother's sleeve as he adjusted his stance, eagerness bubbling just beneath his expression. Ivy knelt, smoothing the skirts of her long dress, her soft green eyes warm and patient, inviting. "Come on now," she said gently, voice like a cool creek smoothing over stones. "There's a story to be told tonight, and the fire's just right." Eli's face brightened like a struck match, his small feet kicking at the dirt. "Miss Ivy," Annie chimed in, voice lilting with hope and innocence. The weight of their grief, the quiet foreignness of their grief-worn existence since their mother's passing, momentarily lifted, replaced by the fragile promise of something new, a fragile thread spun from their neighbor's quiet invitation. Merrill's gaze fell immediately to the children. His tired, stubborn heart beat oddly fast under his worn shirt. Last year, the idea of leaving them even for an hour felt unbearable. Now, that same thought tightened in his chest like an ache sharpened with longing. But he could see in their flush of joy that Ivy's offer was not just for amusement. It was a beacon, a soft light, illuminating paths he feared to tread. He stood, reluctant and watchful, as the children followed Ivy inside. The door closed softly behind them, muffling the sounds of laughter and murmured voices that broke the stillness he'd held so tightly around himself. He leaned against the porch post, eyes fixed on the faint golden glow spilling out beneath the edge of the door, the sound of Annie's bright giggle, and Eli's low, more boyish chuckle, weaving together in a harmony he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The distant laughter softened something inside him, something long sealed and believed lost. Maybe, he thought, maybe good things can be found in smaller pieces than I thought. He swallowed the lump that arose in his throat and exhaled, slow and steady, as the sun dipped fully behind the far hills, leaving the ranch flat and quiet once again. Later, as twilight faded into night, and the children's voices became a distant murmur, Merrill's eyes traced the single bright flame burning in the hearth from outside the window. He wondered if Ivy saw the same stars he did, if she too understood the fragile hope embedded in such small yet meaningful moments. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next day the sky was an unbroken blue, the kind of crisp clarity that only late summer could offer in Kansas, when the air carried the faint dry scent of ripening grain and the dust of the earth warmed by the sun. Meryl's hands, covered in the calluses and dirt of a day's hard labor, gripped the wicker basket with surprising lightness. Inside, newly harvested vegetables, ripe green beans, ripe tomatoes, still warm from the garden, early yellow squash with a faint sheen, and a small bunch of fragrant herbs tied with twine pressed close together, a gift not merely of food, but of trust, tangible offering of thanks. He paused at the edge of Ivy's yard, heart thrumming uncertainly beneath his threadbare shirt as he stepped onto the worn path leading to her door. He could feel the weight of his own hesitations, the corners of his mouth twisting uncertainly. How to speak the words he did not yet have, how to offer this without expectation or recklessness. Still, the basket felt right in his hands, the fruits of the land simple and honest, like the soft beginnings of something he might dare to call friendship. Ivy answered before he could knock, the door creaking gently, revealing her familiar figure framed in the doorway. Her chestnut hair had loosened from its usual braid, strands drifting softly around her face, caught in the late afternoon breeze. For a moment, she simply looked at him, her soft green eyes calm and unassuming. But beneath that quiet gaze was something like quiet appreciation, a recognition that went beyond the surface of words. "Well now," she said, her voice like the murmur of tall grass swaying, neither surprised nor startled, but steady and warm. "What have you got there?" Merrill held the basket out, feeling the rough wicker tremble slightly beneath his grip. "Some from the fields. Thought you might like." His voice faltered just a little, a hint of humility hiding between the lines. "The season's been good to us this year." She reached out and took the basket in her hands, fingers curling warmly around the edges. "Thank you," she said softly. Her smile was small but genuine, crinkling the corners of her eyes, the kind of smile that doesn't demand much, but offers worlds in return. "It looks like a fine harvest." He nodded, still standing there, feeling the pull of something unsaid between them, a steadying thread tightening, with shared histories, quiet understanding. "We've got more than enough to share. Maybe you and the children can come over sometime if you want." Her glance flickered to the horizon, then back to him. There was no rush, no insistence, just a steady acceptance. "I'd like that," she said. "Yes, I'd like that altogether." The afternoon folded softly into the evening, but for the first time in months, Merrill felt the steady thaw of walls beginning to crumble. No grand words were needed, just the simple barter of basket and nod, trust in the soil and in each other's presence, and the slow weaving of their lives together in the quiet middle of a Kansas summer. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The soft, lazy hum of bees outside was punctuated by their gleeful whispers and the occasional sharp gasp of discovery. Among Ivy's modest possessions, something caught their attention, a small, ornate wooden box, carved with intricate patterns and faded paint, delicate as a secret. Annie's fingers brushed over its surface, tracing the gentle curves with reverence. "What's this?" she asked Ivy, her childish voice a mix of wonder and awe. Ivy smiled, a quiet nostalgia tinting her eyes. "That's my music box," she said softly, lifting the lid to reveal a tiny painted scene inside, a miniature meadow under a glass dome, with a tiny bird poised on a branch. As she wound the tiny key in the back, a soft melody unfurled through the room, delicate and bittersweet. Eli's eyes widened as the tune spun through the air, lullaby of notes sweet and hushed. "Daddy, can we take this home?" he asked, looking toward the door, hopeful. Annie nodded eagerly in agreement, clutching Ivy's hand. Ivy hesitated for only a moment before nodding, an unspoken kindness in her gesture. "Take it," she said. "Let it be with you." That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Merrill held the music box carefully in his hands. The wood was warm, smooth by years of touch, its worn edges telling stories of their own. As Ivy's music drifted softly from its small chamber, a distant memory stirred within him, the voice of his late wife, gentle and clear, humming that same tune on a quiet morning long past. His breath caught in his throat as the melody wound deeper into his heartache, reaching a place that had held tight to grief like a fortress for so long. For all the sharp edges of loss, for the nights that had stolen his sleep and the long days of labor ache, there was now a crack, a soft place where the light came through in shards. He sat back in the rocking chair, still and slow, letting the music fill the room like a whispered prayer. The memory was bittersweet, a tender ache wrapped in remembrance. But inside that ache, he could feel the fragile pulse of healing, beating quietly alongside the beat of his children's laughter and Ivy's gentle presence. Long after the last note faded, Merrill's eyes stayed closed, and for the first time in many moons, he allowed himself the soft surrender of hope, not the reckless hope of forever, but the whisper of tomorrow, stitched together in moments like these. Good things did last, not all at once, not loudly and bright, but softly, steadily, wrapped in the unspoken language of small kindnesses, shared glances, and the slow, deep mending of a heart worn, weary by time. The music box sat on the mantelpiece now, a quiet beacon of that promise, its gentle tune lingering in the corners of their days. Outside, the fields stretched wide and open beneath an endless sky, ripe with the unspoken vow of new harvests, new beginnings, and the slow unfolding of life's tender, enduring grace. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Kansas plains, casting long, lazy shadows that stretched like softened arms across the land. The sky was a canvas brushed with streaks of pink and gold, a light so tender it seemed to press itself gently against the worn wooden porch where Merrill and Ivy sat. The children were animatedly chasing fireflies among the tall stalks of drying corn, their laughter tangling with the warm hum of cicadas and the faint rustle of wind in the leaves. It was in this quiet evening hour, when the world seemed to slow and settle, that Ivy spoke. Her voice was low at first, almost reluctant, if she was dipping a toe into still water after a long drought. "Merrill," she said, eyes fixed on the stretch of earth before them, "I reckon there's something I've meant to tell you." She paused, as though gathering the threads of a story that had been folded tight inside her for years. Merrill glanced her way, his usual guarded expression softened by the amber glow of the fading light. His hands, calloused and steady, rested quietly in his lap. He said nothing, but his silence was a fragile invitation. "I've known loss," Ivy began, her tone steady, but edged with unspoken ache. "Not the same kind as yours, Lozen. A husband that close, that sudden, but loss all the same. I lost my ma when I was young, and my pa not long after. Folks said I'd get over it, reckon the pain'd fade. But it didn't. Not the way folks imagine." She shifted slightly, the braid over her shoulder catching the last beams of the sun. "It's like carrying a wound beneath your ribs that never quite mends, but you learn to live with it. You learn to keep breathing even when it aches." Merrill's deep hazel eyes dropped to the weathered boards beneath their feet. His fingers twitched just slightly. His body, usually so tight with pride and self-reliance, loosened in ways he hadn't expected. He felt the weight of her words settle beside the ache he carried. Two different losses, two separate griefs, but somehow each an echo of the other. "Ivy," he said softly, his voice rough but sincere, "I couldn't have known. I never thought to ask, not really." The admission tumbled out like a jagged stone hitting still water, causing ripples he wasn't ready for. She gave him a small, honest smile, one without pretense or self-pity. "I never thought much for talking about it, neither, not until lately." What's kept me going all these years? Well, it's hope. Quiet hope. Not the shouting kind or the foolish kind, but the kind that whispers you'll find a day, where the sun feels warm again, where you can rest easy beside others and know you're not alone. His heart, long barricaded behind stoicism and sorrow, registered a faint stirring. It was a small thing, no louder than a breath held between lightning and thunder, but it was there nonetheless. He looked up into her green eyes, steady with a fragile kind of bravery, and found the beginning of a bridge, that space where loneliness might start to dissolve, piece by piece. I never needed company as much as I thought I did, Merrill confessed, until I met you. You make it feel like maybe the days ahead are worth standing for. His voice cracked, just a little, like dry wood snapping beneath the pressure of a storm. He swallowed hard, a lump pressing in his throat. I don't know how to let anyone in, not after everything, but you've done something to the walls around me, Ivy. I don't know if I'm ready to tear 'em down, but I don't want to keep holding on so tight either. A silence fell then, not empty, but full of understanding. A tender exchange without the need for words. The late summer air wrapped warmly around them, and for the first time since his world had shifted on its axis, Merrill allowed himself to simply be, a man with his guard lowered, a heart nudged open. The days that followed carried on in their usual quiet rhythm, but beneath the surface, something had changed. On a crisp morning not long after, as the soft breath of autumn touched the stalks in the fields, Merrill found himself nodding when Ivy asked if the children might come out to the pumpkin patch. The field lay at the edge of his land, where shadows pooled between the rich, dark soil and golden vines stretched like reaching hands, plump orange globes nestled in their midst. The promise of the harvest was tangible, ripe with the glory of cycles turning, of time making its slow promises. They moved through the field together, Ivy and the children running ahead to compare pumpkin sizes, their laughter a ripple of joy that pulled at the corners of Merrill's mouth. He trailed behind at first, his hands deep in his pockets, reluctance mingling with the faint flicker of anticipation. But as the sun climbed higher, warming their backs and brightening the dust on the ground, he let the tension ease. The children found an especially large pumpkin, one almost as big as little Elsie's head, and Ivy crouched beside it, her fingers tracing the ridges in the vibrant skin. "This one's a good 'un," she said softly. "Might make a fine decoration for the porch come All Hallows Eve." Merrill smiled, that slow, hesitant curve that felt like a seedling breaking through unyielding earth. He knelt down and began to cut the thick stems with practiced care. The sharp snap of the vine, sound enough to command quiet focus. The children gathered close, watching intently as the pumpkins tumbled gently into a bed of straw Ivy had spread across the wagon. The air was filled with the musky sweetness of earth, the faint herbal scent of drying leaves, and something else, something unspoken, carried in the steady rhythm of companions working side by side. There was little need for words between them. The shared labor and occasional exchange smiles said enough. A glance tossed over a shoulder, a soft chuckle as a pumpkin rolled just so, a brush of hands when Ivy steadied a wild sprig of squash vine away from a child's tangled hair. They were suturing the fragile fabric of relationship stitch by careful stitch. Merrill caught her eye once, and for a heartbeat, the boundaries that had seemed so firmly marked blurred. Her green eyes reflected the bright sky above. Quietly, without pressure or expectation, they spoke of tentative trust, of a future not yet written, but perhaps, just maybe, shared. When the wagon was full, the sun dipping toward the west in its slow arc, they started back along the rutted path toward the house. The children's chatter softened to content murmurs, their faces flushed with the glow of exertion and happiness. Ivy walked beside Merrill, their shoulders occasionally touching, a brush so light it could have been a whisper. The pumpkin patch behind them was a stretch of orange jewels, waiting patiently for the season's end, a promise in the quiet harvest. That evening, the sky melted into deep blues and purples, the stars blinking awake with hesitant twinkles. Near the porch basin, beneath a lantern's soft glow, Merrill and Ivy stood side by side, washing the soil and sweat from their hands. The cool water ran over rough palms, threading between knuckles worn raw by work and worry alike. It was an unhurried, shared moment, the plain grace of calling it a day. Her hand brushed against his, lighter than a feather, yet it landed there with a deliberate softness that startled him. Neither moved immediately, caught in the delicate weight of the gesture. So brief, yet so full, it was a silent vow. Not for forever, but for now. For the slow unfolding of trust, like spring buds pushing through thawed earth. Merrill's fingers twitched toward hers but held fast, feeling the warmth of her skin through the cool rush of water. Ivy's gaze slipped to his without flinching, serene and steady, like the evening stars overhead. There was an understanding passing between them, words unspoken, but fiercely felt that this moment was a beginning, as much as it was an end. The fragile threads of healing that had crept between them, tentative as they were, found a place to rest and breathe. Tomorrow, Ivy's voice was a slow, quiet promise. We'll have more work to do. The harvest won't wait long. Her smile was soft, a whisper meant just for him. But when it's done, there'll be time for other things, things worth keeping close. Merrill nodded, a slow grin warming his face. I reckon so, he said simply. And as their hands parted, each carried with it the weightless hope of what might come next. A good thing, lasting and real, born from shared silences and small kindnesses under a fading harvest moon. The morning sun spilled gold across the rolling fields, its low light catching the frost melting slowly from the grass and the bones of the earth beneath. Merrill stood at the edge of his property line, the ridge where his land and Ivy's stretched out like a quiet promise between them when he spotted her. Ivy knelt by a weathered fence post, its wood splintered and bowed under the weight of years and the brutal seasons that had beaten the prairie. Her hands, steady and sure, despite the chill that stiffened the air, worked the rough nails loose and lifted the old post with a strength that caught him off guard. Merrill stepped closer, clearing his throat softly so as not to startle her. That post's seen better days, he said, voice low but carrying distance. I've got new ones in the barn. Better wood, straight and true. The offer settled between them like the quiet hum of the morning. Ivy glanced up, a small smile tipping the corner of her mouth. Figured it was time, she said. The fence ain't just for separating land, it's for keeping things where they ought to be. And sometimes it means keeping folks from wandering where they shouldn't. Her eyes met his, teasing but wholly genuine. Without waiting for a reply, Merrill went back to the barn and returned with an armload of tools and stout posts. He set them down in a rough line beside her work, the scrape of wood on wood loud in the stillness. Give me a hand. His tone was less a request and more a gentle inclusion. She nodded, relief flickering in her eyes, though she said nothing. Together they set to work. The rhythm was companionable, the kind of silent cooperation that feels deeper than conversation. Merrill handed her hammers. Ivy measured the lengths of post with a piece of bent wire she kept tucked in her pocket. Dust and sawdust mingled in the cool air, carried away by the wind that flavored everything with the scent of earth and the faint burn of wood smoke from distant chimneys. As they lifted the next post into the ground, Merrill paused to look at her. The sun caught the strands of her chestnut braid, making it shine like copper. Her face bore the faintest flush from the effort, but her expression was calm, focused, and open in a way he hadn't seen before. Watching her, he felt the hardened crust of his grief soften just a little more. You're good at this, he said, voice softer now. Had to learn. Ivy shrugged like it was nothing, but he saw the steadiness beneath it. The stories her hands could tell. Life doesn't wait for folks to get it right. Fences gotta hold, seeds gotta grow. If you don't put work in, you get nothing but dust and broken boards. Merrill caught the weight of that and nodded. Sometimes reckon it's the same with people. You gotta put work in, even when the ground's been rocky. She smiled then, genuine and quiet. Looks like we're both getting our hands dirty for something worth keeping. The fence grew stronger with every post set and nail driven, but so did the sense that something unspoken was being built between them. Trust, perhaps, or hope, or maybe just the simple acceptance that not every broken thing was meant to stay that way. Winter crept over the prairie with a hush, dressing every surface in glittering white and stillness. Fires burned low in the hearths, and the long, dark hours stretched far into the night. Ivy's young niece, a sprightly girl of 8, with mischievous eyes and a mouth prone to blurting out what the elders left unsaid, arrived for the season. Her laughter was a wild thing, echoing through the cozy rooms, and carrying with it the restless energy of youth and untamed hope. One afternoon, while Merrill sat by the fire, his hands busy with a worn leather boot that needed mending, the girl perched herself on the edge of the chair across from him. She tilted her head, watching the slow motions of his work. Then all at once, without preamble, she asked, "Mr. Merrill, are you going to marry Aunt Ivy soon?" He froze, mid-stitch, the needle caught beneath the leather, his heart skipping in surprise. The question was simple, blunt as a stone, but it struck at the cautious walls he'd been building. Walls meant to protect himself and his children from the sharp edges of loss and loneliness. Merrill met her green eyes, wide and serious in their innocence. "Well now, that's a mighty big question for someone so little," he said carefully, placing the boot aside and folding his hands in his lap. "Why not?" she challenged. But mischief in her smile, tempered with the earnestness of a child who just wanted things to be right and whole. "Aunt Ivy's nice. She's been here a long time. She helps with everything. Ain't you glad when she's around?" He took a slow breath, the warmth of the fire casting flickering shadows on his scarred hands, the memory of old pains still whispering in his bones. "I'm glad," he said simply, truth threading through his quiet words. He didn't deny the thought, yet he didn't rush to promise what lay far beyond certainty. "Marry her," she said softly, leaning forward like she was planting a seed, "so she can stay here with you forever." Her hope unsettled him, prickling at the careful edges of the life he'd resigned himself to. To the idea that good things, if they even existed for someone like him, could last longer than moments stolen beneath the harvest moon. "I reckon we'll see what the future holds," Merrill answered, voice steady but gentle. "And if it's meant to be, well, that's something to cherish." The girl's eyes lit up, satisfied for now with the answer. Though the simple question lingered with Merrill longer than he expected. Maybe good things did last, not loudly, not with fanfare, but in quiet, steady steps, the kind only the brave could take. Asterisk, 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 the winter deepened, white and endless, softening the sharp edges of the world into something more forgiving. One evening, as the wind howled low over the snowdrifts and the household settled into the rhythms of firelight and whispered stories, Merrill found himself holding a small box wrapped in worn leather. Ivy sat across from him by the fire, knitting a simple scarf with hands that moved like they'd been born of the very earth, each stitch deliberate and patient. He looked at her, the shadows playing on her face like a silent hymn. "I don't have much," he began, his voice a low thrum in the still room, "but I want you to have this." He opened the box and revealed a plain silver ring, its surface simple and unadorned. It bore no gem, no grand design, just a circle, unbroken, steady. The ring was smaller than he thought, but heavy with meaning he could barely put into words. He felt the weight of it settle in his palm like a hope he dared not speak aloud, yet wanted her to understand. "I don't know the right words for this," he said quietly, eyes searching hers, "but I'd like for you to stay. With me, with the children, if you want." Ivy's hands stilled their knitting. She took the ring, the silver cool and real, between her fingers. There was no rush in her movements, no breathless excitement, just a quiet grace that made the moment feel sacred and true. She looked up then, her soft green eyes reflecting the firelight, and something unspoken, like a promise whispered in the wind. "I'd like that too," she said simply. Meryl slipped the ring onto her finger, the metal pressing cool against her skin. It was not the grand declaration of a storybook marriage, but a kind of sacred truth, an anchor amid all the shifting seasons. The future was uncertain, but here, in that quiet room, beneath the watchful eye of winter silence, something fragile and strong was forged, a moment of hope, born plain and unadorned. Asterisk, when spring breathed life back into the prairie, the wind carried the scent of fresh earth and new beginnings. Inside the warm kitchen, where the hearth constantly glowed like a heart's steady beat, Merle's youngest child clutched a single wildflower between small fingers sticky with syrup and curiosity. The bouquet Ivy had brought months ago lay pressed in a book on the mantel, its colors faded, but its memory vivid. The child looked up at Ivy,